everybody, and welcome to Project HR, a podcast dedicated to building better workplaces. Project HR is brought to you by Projections, an IRI company. IRI helps organizations navigate workplace challenges, improve employee engagement and productivity, manage labor relations, and implement effective communication strategies to achieve their goals. For more information, you can visit Projections online at projectionsinc.com. I am Jennifer Oraquad, Director of Business Development for IRI, and your host for today's episode of Project HR. I'd like to thank Spring International for sponsoring this episode of Project HR. Spring International can help you leverage feedback tools and people analytics to create meaningful experiences for your employees that'll drive your organization forward. For more information, you can visit Spring International online at springitl.com. Now, we've all spent a lot of time in the last 18 months or so reimagining the way we work. For the first time in generations, we've been able to step outside our accepted working habits and ask critical questions about why we do what we do. And these questions have made planning our post-COVID workplaces a challenge, but also an incredible opportunity. My guest today is best-selling author and leading workplace expert and award-winning business school professor, Dr. Scott Behson. His most recent book, The Whole Person Workplace, Building Better Workplaces Through Work Life, Wellness, and Employee Support, details how, in the wake of the pandemic, we can become more supportive of our workforce and together build a more compassionate and productive workplace. Scott, thanks so much for joining me today on Project HR.
It is so great to be here. Thank you.
Scott, your new book has been described as the resource for workplace success in the post-COVID work world. How did this book come to be?
Well, actually, I started writing a completely different book just a few months before March of 2020 that was going to focus on how we can be more supportive of working parents. And some of the takeaways were going to be like, hey, you could let people work from home every now and then. And
How timely.
things like that, right?
Mhm.
So, and then of course the realities of COVID hit, and the work world turns upside down.
Mhm.
So I kind of tore up my first draft and my proposal and everything, and I set back to work. Also during this time, so from really from March through June or July, I interviewed about 50 CHROs, CEOs, small business owners, other leaders, thought leaders, experts, academics, etc., about the work world,
Mhm.
right in the middle, right when everybody's grappling with all these issues. So
Mhm.
while I think a lot of the book is evergreen, right? I mean, a wellness program is always going to be a good thing, and parental
Sure.
leave is always going to be a good thing. I reflect now, and it's a very rare opportunity to be able to almost chronicle something as it's happening when you're writing a book.
Mhm.
The book clearly is very informed by what all these leading companies, large and small, so multinational firms, grocery stores with 12 employees, what they were grappling with during the height of the pandemic, and what they're planning to do in return to work, return to workplace, and beyond.
So, your book's very positive message was born from a very negative situation for all of us. Do you think we'd be in this place of opening ourselves up to a more compassionate leadership without the difficult events of the last 18 months?
Unfortunately, probably not.
Mhm.
I think there's always been a set of employers that have gotten it right, and a lot of the employers that I've talked to in researching this book, they were able to transition pretty well to pandemic remote work and work from home, and some of the other ways they needed to alter workflow. They were able to do that because they already had built-in flexibility and a high trust type of approach of management, and they had already built teams that were very cohesive and cared about each other and stepped up for each other. And those workplaces they were 10 steps ahead of the other organizations that were really scrambling behind. So there was definitely really smart companies that were thinking about these issues for a long time. However, the last 18 months, so many workplaces have done things they never would have allowed before, right?
Mhm.
All these managers who would never tolerate work from home, now they were forced to. And honestly, they have to recognize that in many cases it worked okay. And, in fact, that a lot of employees did very well. Some employees really thrived. Now, some struggled. Some workplaces struggled. Some employees felt, overburdened, or, highly stressed, or, they had no separation between work and life. But for many employees, work from home was something that they want to retain at least some of. So I think that even the reluctant employers, the ones who've been itching to get everybody back to the office, as soon as they can, I think even they are going to be more open and embrace at least some forms of maybe informal or ad hoc flexibility going forward.
So looking at it from that direction, what does the whole person workplace, as you phrased it, what does that look like?
Right. So the whole person workplace is, and again, this title of the book kind of came a little later in the process, and it came from a quote that I got from somebody that I interviewed. And the quote said, "You have to realize we get the whole person through the door. We get their backs and their hands and their minds and their hearts, and they're at all different phases in their lives." And that just was so beautifully said, and it really got to me. And the fact is, people don't just exist at work from 9 to 5, the piece of themselves that is physically at work or physically working at work, right? Employees are whole people. They have responsibilities and challenges and priorities outside of work, things that they care very much about. And most employees have a desire to bring more of themselves to the workplace as well. So I think if we value employees not just like as a part of the machine, or even just as an asset, lots of companies talk about their employees as their most valued asset, and that's good to some degree. But if we value an employee as an asset, that's good. We take care of assets, but it's still transactional, right? It's like I take care of you so that you're going to return on this investment for me, right? Um, Valuing employees as whole people is a whole other step. And this is saying, as an employer, I care about my employee as a whole person, including their priorities and challenges outside of work. And if I can help with these things, I'm going to try to, because if people feel good about themselves, if they're physically and mentally well outside of work, if they have time to deal with their life challenges and childcare and elder care, and they have enough professional development and all these other things they care about in their life priorities, well then you're going to build this powerful work culture where people really want to be, and people step up and are engaged, and they pay it forward to each other and to customers and clients, etc.
So really, this isn't just adding flexibility or specific programs. It sounds like it's an entire perspective shift for leadership. Is that fair to say?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, that's kind of how the book is divided. It starts with the perspective shift. And I really talk a lot about, and actually, I don't talk much about it. The people I interview talk a lot about why this is the right mindset, and the right value base to create a culture around. And I again using examples from large international companies like Adidas and BASF and Microsoft, and then from Jugtown Country Store in the White Hills of New Hampshire, and kind of everything in between, right? From hundreds of thousands of employees to 12 employees, professionalized environments, to blue collar environments, to hourly employees, to MBAs and CPAs. Anyway, but I have them tell the story about why this is important for them, why they feel it leads to success and sustainable success. But so that's the first part of the book, is really, why is this important? Why is this philosophy or this values base the place to start? And then the rest of the book really takes a survey through a lot of different policies, programs that could be part of a whole person workplace solution for various workplaces. What's right for the large multinational company might not be right for other companies, right? But I talk about, well, what are different approaches to flexibility that you could take? What are different approaches to childcare solutions, to parental leave, to wellness programs, to even things like base compensation, to performance management, to hiring and onboarding, and how all of these can really be based on the set of values that is valuing employees as whole people. And if we start there, then exactly how you implement it in your organization depends on your situation. So what I really try to do is A, set the philosophy, and then B, give a whole range of options and positive examples of companies large and small that have been able to enact at least some of the whole person principles.
So, Scott, what are the benefits of a whole person workplace for the organization and for the people too?
Yeah, so I mean, the most direct thing is that you really create a culture where people want to be. So you have an advantage in terms of attracting, retaining, and engaging your talent. And obviously, there's so many knockoff effects, positive knockoff effects of that, right? You
Hmm.
retain good employees longer; they do a better job. They know their clientele better. You don't lose their internal and external networks when they leave. You don't have this organizational churn that leads to discontinuity of service to customers and clients. So it's really a long term sustainable um, perspective there. And if you just wanted to look at, for example, when you look at things like parental leave, one of the largest times when there's turnover, right? And this is why there was a lot of attention paid to maternity leave, at least initially, was the first year when women give birth, their likelihood for turnover is incredibly high.
Hmm.
And if you think about the cost benefit of being more considered in what your parental leave policy looks like, what your return to work strategy looks like, how you support not just the employee who's going on leave, but support the rest of their work team so nobody feels overburdened. And if we make that process good for everybody, we retain that employee, right? We don't have to
Hmm.
rehire and then overburden other people while that person gets up to speed. So if you think about the costs of turnover, you think about you know, um, the costs of disruption to your business, the business case comes out pretty clearly. And I think the evidence of this right now is all the news about the Great Resignation and the Great
Hmm.
Reset, where what I think is driving it is lots of people are looking around and saying, well, for the last 18 months, did my employer look out for me? Did they consider my concerns at all during these last 18 months? And some felt very supported and they're probably going to stay. Others, they're like, well, I don't feel supported. I don't feel like I was given the respect or the treatment or the physical or psychological safety I deserve in the workplace. And they're looking for employers that are better able to consider them as people, as whole people, not just them as a part of the machine. So, I think clearly this Great Resignation, where so many people are open to looking for new jobs and new employers, this just shows how important it is to earn a reputation as a great employer.
Yeah, and we've written extensively about that on our blog, and so I can definitely see, you can't argue with the benefits that you're putting out there for this approach. And we all want to be the best employers we can be, but all these programs and benefits, how do we pay for it? I mean, it's an expense in time and resources and actually money. So is this something most businesses can afford to do?
Well, this is why things cost, right? Paid time
Hmm.
off is paid, right?
Hmm.
So, right. So you make a good point. So, and I don't want to be Pollyanna here. It's choosing the set of values is hard, and you must make choices, right? If it's important for you to value your employee as a whole person, then it's important enough to have them on parental leave for 2 months, even when they're a key part of your team, right? Like there are trade offs, and you have to be willing to make those trade offs. Now, I submit, and in the long run, these pay off financially as well. However, because of the costs and the upfront costs to a lot of this, I think that clearly large organizations probably have kind of more bandwidth to invest in certain types of programs and policies, right? If you're a food store with 80 employees, you probably can't offer extensive parental leave, right? You need people on the floor, but there are other things you could do, right, that might match your budget and might match the needs of your employees in terms of having an impact on them. So, for example, there are hourly workplaces. Like, listen, when I waited tables back in the day, I got my schedule on Thursday for the weekend, and that was kind of okay. I was a college student, and I didn't really have much plans. But what if I had family? How do you plan ahead? How do you plan for childcare or doctor's appointments or elder care or able to plan a vacation or whatever if you don't know your schedule. So, lots of organizations, in this great resignation, part of what these hourly employers are doing is not just paying a little bit more, but implementing things where people know their schedules 3 or 4 weeks in advance and it can't be changed on them. And in that way, we're respecting, right, the employee as a whole person and providing them the schedule certainty for them to develop a solution for their work life challenges. So that's just like one example of how something that's pretty low cost can be implemented in a certain environment, right? So that's what we need to do is figure out what are our resources, what are the needs of our employees, what can we invest in, and also, frankly, large organizations can have the great policies. Smaller organizations, you get to know your people, and maybe you can customize your solutions. So there's ways, big ways, investing in a large wellness program, and then there's small ways, like just making sure we're respecting people's time. Uh, Start building on your whole person workplace values.
And that makes sense that, these solutions need to be tailored and specific to our unique organizations, that, the investment doesn't have to be gigantic to work, that we can make small adjustments in our ways of thinking to make this happen.
Yeah, I mean, again, right? So once you have the philosophy and the value set, then you start thinking about, well, how do I implement this, right, in a way
Mhm.
that affects my employees? And a large company like Adidas, when they transferred people to a new city, to a new location, they worked with local sports camps and summer camps ahead of time, so that the employees who were being transferred in, their kids had were pre given slots in these summer camps. Just one less thing to worry about
Yeah.
when they had to move, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, these are really cool. And I just love hearing when an organization decides to be empathetic and creative.
That's great. Those are great solutions. Obviously very creative thinking there. So, Scott, I'm going to take a quick sponsorship break right now. But when we come back, I want to dive into how we can all transform our companies into whole person workplaces. So stay with us.
Spring International can help your organization attract and retain the right people, develop your best culture, and demonstrate the return on investment of your employee engagement programs. With tools like online focus groups, real-time feedback, employee experience surveys, labor relations dashboards, and advanced analytics, you can leverage data to make more informed HR decisions, helping you to become a best place to work and an employer of choice for high-potential talent. Get started today with data insights at every stage of the employee life cycle. Spring International's proven methods will take the guesswork out of attracting, engaging, and retaining the right people, as well as demonstrating how your people investments are boosting business performance. Learn more at our website at springitl.com or give us a call at 610-834-7600. Spring International. People insights that drive performance.
And we're back with best-selling author, leading workplace expert, and business school professor, Dr. Scott Behson. So, Scott, what's involved in transforming a business into a whole person workplace?
Well, I think, it goes back to, if you think about how do you change an organization's culture, right? You have to adopt a set of values and then make those values real by your decision making over a period of time, the types of policies and programs that you implement over time, how you get rid of potential barriers to the changes that you want to make. So if you have, for example, a manager who is resistant to remote work, making sure that we're either orienting them or providing some carrots and sticks for them to get back on board. And it takes probably ways large and small. It takes time
Mm.
and consistency of decision making for people to trust that these values aren't just nice things that people say, but they're something that are actually real. So I think that's kind of where I'd start with it. So however you're trying to change the culture of your organization, you adopt this set of values that says we value our employees as whole people, and that's like a bedrock value in our organization. Then how does leadership's decision making and public statements and everything like that line up with that over a period of time. So one of the things I've done professionally over the last decade or two, because my prior book was called The Working Dad's Survival Guide, and it was aimed for helping working fathers with advice and encouragement on how to balance work and family.
Hmm.
And I did a lot of work with companies and organizations on, I work with a lot of companies that have implemented good paternity leave programs, but they're not getting a lot of uptick on it, a
Hmm.
lot of uptake on it.
Mm-hmm.
And, they always ask me, so why? We sincerely mean this. Like, we're frustrated by the fact that we're offering, 12 weeks leave, but the guys are only taking 2 weeks. We'd love for them to take more. We'd love to, have some people take more and publicize it and the whole works. And I said, well, you're not going to like my answer here. My answer is you're going to have to be consistent with this for about 3 years.
Mm.
And you're going to have to really, provide supports, so you're going to have to provide some orientations to expectant fathers, to their managers, to their work teams.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have to, break down the story that they might have told themselves. That's like, if I take 6 weeks of paternity leave, like my career's shot. Right? They need to know that's not the case anymore. And the only way they can know that's not the case anymore is for it not to be the case anymore, and them to see it repeatedly. So I think a lot of companies sometimes want to short circuit this, or just feel like, hey, I'm doing this. And, it takes time to really become, something that is really embedded in your organization. And that's, and that goes to one other thing that's related to what I have in the whole person workplace is, it's one thing to have these add-on work-life policies. It's another thing, we have to build our whole person values into things like our base pay and to our base benefits packages. And, for example, a place like Uncommon Goods, an e-retailer out of Brooklyn, they extend the same benefits to their hourly warehouse workers as they do to their techies and their management types. Their warehouse workers start at $18 an hour. And those are choices, right, that embed the fact that they care about their employees into their compensation and benefits. And so then it's not just like, we have a program because we care about you, right? You're showing that we care about you based on, this clear set of choices that we've made.
Mm-hmm. So really, who's involved in this effort? Like, who in my organization needs to get it? I mean, it sounds like you're saying everyone, but really, if we're at its core, who needs to be involved in this effort?
Well, I mean, ideally everybody. And I talk about that, and many of the people I interviewed talk about that it's a two-way street, and that when you really build this, when you build a high trust work culture, people need to step up, right? And people need to help each other out too. And again, a whole person workplace kind of builds and breeds that culture. But, to me, it has to start somewhere, and it often starts with human resources professionals, because, we're much more plugged into what the possibilities are here, and we have the expertise. But when top leadership gets involved and supports it, like, things get supercharged. And, maybe my favorite company to have studied, and I've talked to so many of their top people, and I talked to their current COO and CHRO and their former CHRO for the book. It's Ryan LLC. I don't know if you've heard of them. They're a financial services company based out of Dallas. And a long time ago, they switched to what's called a results-only workplace, where people can work from anywhere at any time as long as work gets done. And they transformed their organization about how they measure performance, how they get teams to agree to work together. And this was well before the pandemic. This was back in the 2000s. And the thing is, the former chief human resources officer was badgering the CEO time and time again on, we need to have more flexibility. We need to have a less like hours culture, the whole, like, if you're not working 65 hours, you're not working enough kind of culture, this like modern sweatshop kind of model.
Right.
And she kept getting slammed, like, and the CEO's like, I don't want to hear about that. I don't want to hear about that. And then one day, this up and coming young leader in the organization, this young woman, goes to the CEO's office and resigns saying, I love this job, I love this company, but I'm starting a family and I don't see how I can make that work while working here.
Hmm.
And that got to the CEO, and he immediately called the chief human resources officer in, and he's like, do whatever you need to do. And he supported it with money and time and his vocal support. And now, they're one of those companies that are on the Fortune 100 every year. They're so much more financially successful than they used to be.
Hmm.
In fact, the CEO was ranked by Glassdoor as the #2 most effective CEO during the pandemic. And it really transformed their company. They were able to work without that much of a hitch during the last 18 months because they had already built a high trust culture, familiarity with working remotely, being able to measure performance, even without always seeing each other. And obviously it's a large scale effort. It took them 8 years or so to really get this kind of up and running and where they wanted. But what turbocharged it was HR advocating, and then leadership putting its weight behind it. And that's probably the model that will be most successful. And also, right, this came from employees, somewhat inadvertently in this case, but still.
Hmm. Sure. Well, and it sounds like, what you're saying is that this requires buy-in from everyone, not just leadership, but the employees too. And, it may be a communication issue, but is that how you see it working? It's got to have buy-in from everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for example, if one of the things you're going to do is be more generous with parental leave, for example,
Mm-hmm.
you have to make sure that you're not overburdening the rest of the work team, right? That you can use the time leading up to it to make sure you're distributing work, you're providing developmental opportunities, right? You're maybe hiring temps or interns,
Hmm.
you're creating overlapping responsibilities in your work team so things don't fall through. Because if you're supporting one person, right, the whole person that is this new parent, that's great. But if you're doing that at the expense of this other employee, then you're not treating them as a whole person either,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So really what we need to do is make sure that everyone is included in some way, shape, or form. And, it's better in many cases not to frame something as we're supporting childcare as opposed to here are the range of supports that we provide. Everyone here can plug in here somewhere, right? Then people stop keeping score as
Mm-hmm.
much and feeling like, well, they're supporting this person but they're not supporting me.
Mm-hmm.
If you're 22 and it's a long way before you're going to have kids,
Mm-hmm.
what are they doing for you in terms of
Right.
time for life or helping you with your student loans or some things that might be more relevant for you, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Your physical health or your wellness, right? So you want to make sure that you're providing this wide range of supports so that you're not necessarily creating like a perception that some people are privileged over others, right? It
Right.
has to work for everybody.
Right, right. And that kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier about how, it has to be a unique solution, not just for cost and investment in time, but also for the people who are the recipients of this, this actual program.
Yeah.
Scott, we're going to take some time out for another quick break. We'll be right back after this. You're listening to the Project HR podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Oraqua, and my guest today is best-selling author, leading workplace expert, and business school professor, Dr. Scott Behson. And we are back. So I'd like to bring the discussion back around to your book itself, The Whole Person Workplace, Building Better Workplaces Through Work-Life, Wellness, and Employee Support. And the book walks the reader through the process of finding custom solutions for building out that whole person workplace. How do you do that?
Well, it goes back to some of what we said before, which was, once you decide to take on this set of cultural values, then how you implement it is up to you based on the situation you're in, the priorities of your people, etc. So and we talked a lot about empathy and creativity, and I guess I'll add one more thing to the mix, which is listening. You really need to be able to have the pulse of your employees to understand what concerns they have, what are some of the stressors that they might have in their work or in their lives that are keeping them from thriving and feeling as well, either emotionally or physically, as they could.
Mm-hmm.
And, in large organizations, there's formal mechanisms to do some listening. In smaller organizations, we can get to know our people much more individually and create customized solutions. But it's really important to listen, because if you're not listening, you can implement lots of great sounding programs, but they're not going to be used, and they're not going to be valued, and they're not
Mm-hmm.
going to have the impact you want. And, then they just become like, oh, some other thing HR is doing.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I think that fundamentally we need to keep, have the pulse of our workforce. And for leaders, I think especially, even the most well-intentioned people have blind spots
Mm-hmm.
and things they might not have thought of or considered. And so you really need to widen the range of people you listen to when it comes to kind of organizational planning and employee concerns. So, not to stereotype or anything, but if your top leadership are all 65-year-old white men who had stay-at-home spouses,
Mm-hmm.
they never probably had to grapple with work life or work family conflict and balance that,
Mm-hmm.
in their lives. And they might be very well intentioned. They might want to be very supportive, but they might not have that perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's important that they are in contact with, and that there are people in on decision making who have that different experience or that different backgrounds. And you want to
Mm-hmm.
make sure, obviously, people of different ethnicities and backgrounds, and the whole range of diversity are represented in how we listen to employees. And not just listening, but who and how things get implemented should involve a wide diversity of people as well.
Mm-hmm, hmm. I want to go back to your point just a second ago. You were saying that, you need to make sure that this isn't just another thing HR is doing. Do you think we can make this whole person workplace sustainable into the future? How do we avoid going right back to where we were in 2019 once the immediate danger has passed?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the big question, right? Of the workplace in, I think, 2021, 22
Mm,
is, how far is this going to swing back? I
mm-hmm,
think, organizations that have embedded this, that leaders have taken this on as this is how we're going to operate, then it's going to at least some degree of flexibility and empathy and kind of this employee supportiveness is going to maintain. Obviously, I'm not too naive to say that, you know, there are workplaces that just want to get back to,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Sure.
back exactly to where it was. But again, we talked about this with the Great Resignation stuff, that I think the marketplace of employees is going to have something to say about this.
So obviously, I'm intrigued by this concept. I'm sure some of our listeners are too. If somebody wants to learn more about you, get your book or any other books in your catalog, where should they go?
Great. So, the book, anywhere you buy books, Amazon is probably the easiest place for most people.
Mm-hmm,
But it's available at IndieBounds, which I would recommend.
mm-hmm.
That's the online bookseller. That's a collection of independent bookstores. But if you want to find out more about me and my work, scottbehson.com, SCOTTBEHSON.com. And there's links to my 3 books, this being the most recent. Also, the other things I've written out in the world,
Mm-hmm.
the services I provide, and other things about me there.
Okay, for sure. We'll include links to Scott's website, as well as the links to buy The Whole Person Workplace, Building Better Workplaces Through Work-Life Wellness and Employee Support. Those will be included in the episode's companion guide, so be sure to unlock that today at projectionsinc.com/podcast. Right now, though, Scott, it is time for our lightning round, and these are questions we ask of every guest of the podcast. Are you ready?
Yes.
All right. Our first question is a topic showdown. In this episode, we've been talking about whole person workplaces, which support employees in work-life challenges. So, Scott, which is more challenging for you personally, finding time for all you wish to achieve at work or finding time for all you wish to achieve in your personal life?
Honestly, it's the work part. I feel very confident I'm able to be a very present father and a very good husband, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really important to me. And my work, I tend to overload myself. So I'm a university professor, so my job is very, there's only so much that has to be done at a particular time, but there's always something to do, and I always add things to my plate. So I'm always scrambling at work.
All right, Scott, what's the best book you've read recently?
There's a new book from my friend Amy Beacom, and it's coming out in about a month, actually. It's called The Parental Leave Playbook, and I think it's amazing. And it's a book and it's for people who are planning on taking parental leave and everything they might need to know. And I think it'd be a great resource, not just for the employee, but for employers to really get a good handle on these important issues.
Yeah. All right. What's your favorite thing about working to improve workplaces?
As an academic, sometimes what we do is very theoretical, and we write these papers that take 2 years to come out, and they're read by 50 people.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt for a long time a lot of my good academic work didn't really have a lot of impact, and I think that working with workplaces and then writing books like this helped me really have an impact, and that feels really good.
I love that. What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
It took me a long time to understand this, but just not sweat the small stuff. I used to be much more type A, and everything has to be just so, and I've been able to let go of a lot of less important things, and it's made me a lot happier and I think more productive.
Yeah. I think that comes with age and wisdom as well.
Yeah.
I can relate to that. My last question is, who or what inspires you?
A lot of the workplaces, a lot of the leaders I talked to in this book inspired me. I didn't get to talk about Dan Price, who's Gravity Payments CEO. He was the guy who famously, about 5-6 years ago, raised the minimum salary to $70,000 in his company. And he now, I don't know if you followed him on social media or anything, he is like crusading for better workplaces for employees. So I think it's great when, because there's an assumption CEOs are in it for, themselves or for the money or for the board. And I think it's inspiring when CEOs really, take on, what's best for employees.
Very nice. Scott, thanks so much for joining me today on this week's episode of Project HR.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Thanks to our listeners, and once again, this is your reminder to grab the companion guide for this episode at projectionsinc.com/podcast. If you'd like to be on Project HR, or you know someone who would, feel free to email us at projecthr@projectionsinc.com. And just a reminder to check out the People Insights tools available from our sponsor, Spring International. Spring International can help you gain insight into the data that drives your organization forward. For more information, visit Spring International online at springitl.com. And last, but certainly not least, to make sure you never miss an episode of Project HR, I hope you'll subscribe to the podcast. Drop us a line, leave us a review, or give us a handful of stars wherever you get your content. That's it from me for now. Let's make it a great day at work.